My best friends stole my things, so I took revenge, legally. Dan and I had been close since 5th grade. Not, sometimes hang out, close, I mean real family level close. We grew up together, stayed in each other's lives through school, adulthood, relationships, everything. We even built our lives side by side. I got married, he got married soon after, and for a long time it felt like we were going to be one of those lifelong friendships that never breaks. Then my life shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. I finally admitted something I'd ignored for years: I was attracted to women. And I needed to leave my husband. And before anyone assumes the dramatic version of that story, no. My ex-husband wasn't abusive. He wasn't a villain. He was honestly a great person. He wanted me to be happy, to be honest with myself, and he didn't try to punish me for figuring myself out later in life. His family even moved closer and surrounded him with love so he wouldn't be alone when I left. Eventually he found someone who truly fit him. There was no resentment between us, just a painful, adult kind of change. But that change meant I needed somewhere to live. Dan and his husband were renting this huge house they couldn't really afford. When I told Dan I needed to move out and start over on my own, they offered me one of their rooms. They said I could stay for a little while for free until I got back on my feet. I was grateful. I moved in. A few days later, the story changed. They came to me and said they needed rent right away because Dan had health issues and couldn't work for a bit. I didn't fight it. The request was reasonable, and I didn't want to be a burden. So I agreed. I paid on time every month, no drama, no late payments, no excuses. For the first time in my life, I was living alone as an adult. I'd been with my ex-husband since college, so this new independence felt unreal. Lonely sometimes, yes, but also freeing. Like I could breathe again. And that's when the other roommate moved in. She was a lesbian about my age, and it felt like the universe was doing something weirdly specific because we had the same birthday. Even our pets had the same birthday. We clicked instantly. We became close friends, not romantic, not secretly in love, nothing like that. Just the kind of friendship that makes a hard life transition feel lighter. Weekends became fun again. We'd go out, laugh too loud, dress up, catch attention, feel alive. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was actually enjoying my life. And that's when Dan started changing. At first, it was small. Comments. Complaints. Little passive-aggressive remarks about mess, about noise, about the vibe of the house. He hated that the new roommate wasn't neat. He hated that she sometimes brought people home late after going out. He hated that she left an empty wine bottle in his bathroom, and Dan was sober, so even seeing it annoyed him on principle. And I'll be honest, once, I was involved in bringing someone home too. Not proud of it, but it happened. The moment Dan said it made him uncomfortable, I stopped. Immediately. But what I didn't know was that Dan wasn't just annoyed, he was quietly blaming me for things that weren't even mine. That wine bottle? It wasn't mine. That night? I didn't even go out with her. But in his head, we were a team, and if one of us did something, both of us were guilty. The worst part? He didn't talk to me. He didn't pull me aside and say, "Hey, what's going on? I'm feeling uncomfortable." He didn't give me a chance to defend myself. The atmosphere just shifted. Like the house itself became tense. And then it escalated fast. Dan decided to rent out more rooms. He moved in another roommate, a middle-aged woman he worked with, and her teenage daughter. They lived in the basement. And this woman, let's just say, controlling, doesn't even cover it. She acted like she owned the house, like everyone was a child, like every decision needed her approval. She was loud, aggressive, judgmental, the type of person who creates rules out of thin air and then punishes you for not following them. Within weeks, she had Dan wrapped around her finger. And one day, Dan left me a note. Not even a conversation. A note. It said I had 5 days to move out. 5 days. I was young. I didn't know tenant rights. I didn't know laws. I didn't know what was allowed and what wasn't. I just felt my stomach drop. I had nowhere to go. No plan. No way to move all my stuff that quickly. I was embarrassed. I was scared. And I didn't even want to tell anyone because it felt humiliating, like I'd somehow failed at being an adult. But my sister found out. She told my dad. And my dad showed up like a superhero I didn't ask for, with a trailer, ready to move everything. Pause for 1 second because I still get emotional thinking about that. I didn't even have to beg. I didn't have to explain myself perfectly. My father just showed up. He became my knight in shining armor in the moment I was too ashamed to ask for help. And here's what makes it even more suspicious. Dan left the city on purpose during my move. Like, conveniently disappeared. His husband stayed behind, drunk as hell, but still tried to play the good guy. He offered to help me carry things, like he wanted to be seen as generous, until he realized I was actually going to accept the help. Then he looked annoyed, like it was my fault for saying yes to the help he offered. I moved as much as I could. But I couldn't fit everything in my car. So I placed what was left in the garage. And it wasn't just random junk. I sell new and vintage items online. A lot of those things were in the garage because there had been a garage sale recently and the 2-car garage was still packed with unsold items, like nothing had moved at all. So, trying to be responsible, I packed my remaining personal things, including a chunk of clothes still hanging in the closet, and put them with my sale items in the garage. Before I left, I told Dan's husband clearly, I can't take everything right now. I'll come back for the rest soon. He was polite. Calm. He said there was no rush. Then the next day, Dan messaged me photos of the carpet in my old room. Cat urine stains. He blamed my cat. He was furious. He demanded money. But I knew it wasn't my cat. Because I remembered a moment from earlier, they had entered my room while I was at work. Their cat slipped in. They closed the door without the cat. And later, when I came home and opened the door, their cat flew out, and there was a puddle. Meaning, they went into my room without permission. Locked their own cat inside. And then acted like it was my fault. And this wasn't the first boundary issue, either. There had been a time when I ordered breakfast to go, left it in my room, and someone came in, left the door open, and their dog ran in and stole my food right off my dresser. I cared about privacy. Boundaries mattered to me. But I kept swallowing it because I didn't want conflict. So when Dan exploded over the carpet, I tried to stay calm. I even offered a solution. I'd come back the next day with my dad's carpet washing machine and clean it properly, if they gave me time, like a normal adult conversation would. Dan didn't listen. He snapped and told me I wasn't welcome anymore, and our 15-year friendship was over. Then came the part that broke me. A week later, I tried to collect the rest of my belongings. I texted Dan, "Is anyone home? Can I come pick up my things?" Nothing. Then he blocked me. On multiple platforms. Like I was a stranger. Like I was some ex he needed to erase. So 4 days later, I went there in person with my girlfriend. The garage was open. And my stomach dropped immediately. My things were gone. Not just moved. Not organized. Gone. And what made it even more obvious? The garage was still full of their untouched items from the sale, like nothing had been cleaned out at all. The only evidence I ever lived there was a lonely pink hanger on the floor. I rang the doorbell. The basement tyrant stuck her head out like a guard dog. I said, "I'm here for my things." She said, "Call Dan." I said, "I did." "He's ignoring me." She slammed the door. Closed the garage. So I called the police. And yeah. I learned the hard way. It's a civil dispute. They wouldn't do anything. I sat in my car realizing my stuff was probably gone forever, including clothes my grandmother had sewn for me when I was young. Pieces of my life. Sentimental things you can't replace. And in the middle of that heartbreak, my girlfriend did something petty. We had this half-full cup of old Frappuccino in the car. It had been sitting there all day, warm and gross. She poured it through the opening into the roof of Dan's car. Not enough to damage anything. Just enough to say, "I see you." But that was the tiny revenge. The real revenge took time. I went home destroyed. And then, months later, I started researching. I read Minnesota tenant laws. I read eviction requirements. I read what landlords can and can't do with property. And I realized, what Dan did was illegal. If you're paying rent, you're a tenant. Agreement or not. And tenants are entitled to proper notice, 30 days. And landlords have to store your belongings for a period of time before dumping them. I would never touch someone else's property like that. Even if I hated them. Especially if they were forced out in days. But Dan didn't just throw them away. Because when I checked social media through my girlfriend's accounts, I found photos of Dan wearing my clothes. Not similar clothes. My clothes. I found pictures of the tyrant's daughter wearing shirts my little sister had given me for my birthday. My stuff wasn't donated. My stuff was being worn like trophies. I was furious. So I did everything the boring, terrifying adult way. I sent formal letters demanding my property back. They ignored every single one. I gathered texts, photos, proof of rent payments, the eviction note, screenshots, everything. Then I filed a small claims case. Alone. No lawyer. They didn't show up. The judge ruled completely in my favor. I was awarded $3,000. But even after the court order, they still refused to pay. Dan blocked me everywhere. I couldn't even contact them like normal people. And when I finally managed to trick his husband into answering a hidden number, I told him about the judgment. He said, "You'll never get a penny from us." That sentence flipped a switch in me. Because up until then, part of me still hoped they'd just do the right thing. After that, I didn't hope anymore. I went for wage garnishment, to legally take it from their paycheck. But the paperwork kept coming back, like it wasn't being delivered. Because I didn't have their new address. I was stuck. Then something happened that felt like a miracle. A court clerk called me after the paperwork was returned multiple times. She told me she didn't want me wasting more time and money showing up to court if nothing could be served. I explained I didn't know where they moved. I only had a clue, a neighboring city listed next to their names in some records. She listened. We hung up. And then she called me back. She said she'd dug around and found an updated address. I just sat there like, "Are you serious?" That woman saved my entire case. Without her, I would have been stuck forever. So the documents got served. And then, of course, Dan and his husband filed for bankruptcy. They thought it would erase the debt. But here's what they didn't understand. Court judgments involving malicious intent don't just disappear like unpaid cable bills. So I filed again to challenge the bankruptcy and prove they stole my things intentionally. I prepared everything. Again. Alone. Again. Their lawyer called and tried to scare me. He claimed the homeowner supposedly came by and did spring cleaning, saw unnecessary items, and donated them to charity, and would testify that there was no malicious intent. It was absurd. I'd never even met the homeowner while I lived there. And the garage was full of their items, not mine. The story didn't make sense. The lawyer was just trying to intimidate me. And I was shaking. My voice was trembling. But I said no. I refused to drop it. Then came the creditors' meeting, and I showed up looking like the most ridiculous version of myself on purpose. Pencil skirt. Cute business look. Like a blonde lawyer in a movie. Not because I thought it would change the law. Because I wanted Dan to look at me and realize, I'm not scared of you anymore. Nothing dramatic happened in that meeting, but I followed through. I pushed the case forward. And then, the tone changed. A week or two later, their lawyer called again, completely different attitude. Now he wanted a settlement. First he offered $1,000 total. I said no. Then he offered $1,000 upfront, and monthly payments after. And I accepted, because I wasn't trying to destroy them. I just wanted justice. And I'd already priced my stolen items low on purpose, so I looked reasonable in court. 4 years later, the last payment arrived. And attached to it was a note with apologies. It didn't bring back the clothes my grandmother made. It didn't restore a friendship that lasted most of my life. But it came at a moment when I was struggling with depression, barely holding myself together, and trying to keep a roof over my head. So no, I didn't get revenge by screaming. Or smashing things. Or making a scene. I got revenge the quiet way. Patience. Preparation. Paperwork. Persistence. And I won.